This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses. In 2018, the Boss GT1000 was released. Now, this was Boss's flagship modeler, and for decades, Boss have been sort of at the forefront of modelling. They were the first people to put modelling on the floor in a pedal. Line 6 were one of the first to put modelling into an available amp, mass-produced. I think there were a couple of companies, Johnson, I think, before that. But, you know, the first kind of mass-produced product. So Boss have been there from the start. I think in this video I wanted to look at, are Boss being left behind in some regards in the modelling game? And just look at it from the point of view of, like, imagine you were in a meeting with someone at Boss, or you're working at Boss, and kind of you're thinking about what your products do and what the competition does. And that's kind of the framework that I wanted to look at this video for a bit of fun. If anyone at Boss is watching this, it's not meant like in a negative way. I think it's just looking and kind of trying to find, you know, and maybe look at what Boss could do next. Because there are a few parts of the guitar market that Boss have got sewn up. First of all, the compact pedals, I think, are probably the most important pedals being made in terms of super high quality, super great tone. The Boss OD3, for example, is one of my favourite drive pedals ever. The Boss Dimension Wisercraft sounds incredible. On my board, I've got a Boss Angry Driver JB2. Not only that, but I think in terms of the modelling amp market, such as it is, I think basically Boss has that sewn up pretty nicely. Like the Katana in all its forms, the Waza Airs, you know, Boss have really nailed quite a lot of product, right? Katana Head Mark II I've got over there. I've got Boss Waza Airs that I really like using. The Katana Go is their latest kind of thing, which actually surprisingly does a really good job. Now, The modelling thing, though, I think you could look at it and go, okay, well, what are they doing right? Well, first of all, the effects. I'm thinking specifically of the GT1000 core, the GT1000, and the GX100. So, first of all, the effects within the Boss stuff, I think, rivals some of the big players. I guess when you think about modelling, feel free to jump in the comments and kind of give your top four, top three. I think we think of probably Fractal. I think we think of Line 6. I think we think of Kemper. I think we think of Neural DSP. And I think probably, am I missing anything super obvious? I could be, but to me it seems like those are the kind of the big four. And you got kind of, I don't see loads of people talking about the Boss stuff. You get Headrush, people talk about that quite nicely. Hotone stuff, you get Moore, the Chinese bits and pieces. I'm definitely omitting something obvious here. But anyway, you get people talking about these other things. So, for instance, Kemper and Neural DSP, what do they do that Boss don't do? Well, of course, profiling, capturing. So, that could be a big part of something that Boss could be looking at that could revolutionize their modeling products, right? Because I think it's something that someone like Tonex, IK Multimedia, came along and kind of said, here's a thing that we can do now. And I think that made a pretty big splash. Similarly with Neural DSP, that made a big splash where it's like, well, now you can capture a piece of technology that you've already got. This would be a really huge benefit for Boss, I think, because they've actually got a limited amount of amps in there, which I might come on to later on when it comes to sort of negatives. But great effects. The hardware is really good. 32-bit processing. Almost all of the other competitors are 24-bit. So there is some actual tangible chipset advantages with the Boss stuff as well, if you're into that sort of thing, as far as I could guess, being a non-techie. Now, what do Boss not do particularly well? Or what is it that things like the Helix, the Quad Cortex do really well? And I think that is like an attractive UI. So the GX100 is a color touchscreen. However, if you look at it compared to the Quad Cortex, for example, or the Tone Master Pro, that was the one that I'm forgetting, then put them side by side, I think you'll get a fair reflection of what the difference might be there. So the GX100 touchscreen does work. It's fairly functional. It's quite small compared to those other two. And I think if you look at it side by side, leave your opinions in the comments. I think that's one thing you could look at and you could say, well, Neural DSP, yes, it looks quite similar to a Helix, but that's how it looks, and it's quite tidy, looks pretty clean, and so on. Similarly, you could look at a Line 6 Helix, it looks pretty clean, bearing in mind that came out 3 years prior to the GT1000 and GT1000 core. Stands up really well. You could look at something like the Fender Tone Master Pro UI and go, okay, well, that seems to be taking like the Quad Cortex thing, going even maybe a bit further in terms of skeuomorphic designs, actually having like an amp face on top of it, So that's kind of where UI could be going, right? I think it'd be fair to say that Boss has some work to do in that area, or could have. Then you look at someone like, say, Fractal. What does Fractal do that Boss maybe don't? And this is a real key one for Fractal, I think, is the sheer amount of amps that they've modelled in there, to the point where pretty much most amps that you could think of, or a variation of them, Fractal have probably got it in there somewhere. They got like over 300 amps. Boss has a way shorter list, and within that list they've even got amps that are not really based on anything in real life, which I think is actually an important thing to talk about, and for some other products could be a positive, but in the context where you don't have loads of choice anyway. So if you're looking for certain amplifiers, modern kind of rev style things, or 5150s, or bits and pieces that you might be able to get in other modelers, AC20s, the sorts of things that we see. There's a bit of that is one area where Boss has kind of not kept up pace, I think, with the other manufacturers. So I think that is an area which could be due some attention. As I said, if you were to make profiling or capturing possible on Boss devices, then maybe that sort of gap would be closed in some regards. But for me, it's one area which is a little bit tricky with the Boss stuff, because it's like, well, if I was going to be looking to emulate certain tones, I don't have a great starting point, because some of these things are not based in reality with real amplifiers and stuff. And another caveat to that is that they also don't have like the authentic kind of controls that you have on a real like Vox. So even the Voxes in there have like mid controls and bits and pieces that wouldn't be on the real amp. So there's a few things to be aware of with that, and I think that is possibly one of the reasons why Boss doesn't necessarily, for some people, make it into the kind of top 4. One other key area that a couple of the manufacturers kind of have is like Neural DSP and Line 6, or Neural DSP are working on this. IK Multimedia have got this, but a plug-in form of your hardware with some kind of cross compatibility. Neural DSP, of course, have been talking about this for about 4 years in terms of bringing the plugins to the hardware. Whether that happens soon is, well, it should be this quarter, I think. But that is an area that could be somewhat revolutionary. It's something that pretty much only the Helix can do at the moment, but for me it is something I really do make a lot of use of. And when I'm kind of playing guitar with just an audio interface into my DAW, to be able to pull up a VST with the same tones that I'm used to using sort of live and stuff, that is actually a bit of a game changer. It's not a huge list of things that I think that Boss are actually doing wrong. And in terms of the effects that are in there and the amps that are in there, I do actually think there's quite a lot of great stuff in there. I think their cab block could use some, modernizing as well. I think it's sort of, to me, I feel like it's due a bit of an overhaul. And I think that under the hood, the hardware, the tones, all that stuff is good. It's like the stuff on top of that, the user experience, that needs a bit more attention, I think. And I do think it deserves it, because, for instance, with like the Boss IR2, I think that showed that actually the Boss stuff does sound pretty good compared to the competition too. It's not like they're slouches on any of these things. So just, each time... I've got a preset here, JC Boutique Lead. I think this is on the Boss Tone Exchange. I've got the expression pedal controls to the delay. I've got a boost. And so I've got that. I can also switch on or off a graphic EQ. And then the other thing that I've got going on here is that control switch. I can switch between 2 amps. Another thing which is really worth talking about here is that actually the Boss GX100 now is incredibly competitively priced compared to, say for instance, the Line 6 HX Stomp right now. It's between £600 and £700 in the UK right now. The GX100 is £450. Now the GX100 in terms of DSP that you've got on there is actually far and above what you could get on an HX Stomp. So for instance, you can run a preset with 2 amplifiers, loads of effects. Yeah, you can just run way more effects than you would get on an HX Stomp. So I think in terms of processing power as well, in the kind of even a £450 GX100 compared to say like the Line 6, you're getting a lot of bang for your buck with the Boss stuff compared to like a Quad Cortex, for example, you know, £1,500, 3 times the price. Tone Master Pro, 3 times the price. HX Stomp, you know, nearly double the price. Not quite, but you know. So I think, yeah, it to me does seem like Boss, in terms of these modelers like the GT1000 Core as well and the GT1000, I think here's a real key area that all of the other manufacturers do regular updates or semi-regular updates at all. I think that is the biggest number one thing that Boss should be considering. Like, how do we keep people interested in these devices? Is something that has kept Kemper relevant to today, something that keeps Line 6 Helix relevant till today, and something that keeps people buying all of this other gear and keeps them, you know, sticking with that piece of gear for a longer amount of time. That is the one area that I think Boss should really look at, I think. Let me know your thoughts in the comments if you've got them. As I say, I think Boss is a really important company for guitar players, and I'd like to see from them a modeler that kind of, I think, keeps up or kept up with competition, maybe even pushes things forward a bit further than where they're currently at, I think. If you want any of my GX100 tones or GT1000 Core, jump onto the Boss Tone Exchange where I did some presets for them. This video here is obviously not sponsored, but in the past I have done some. Cheers.